What are some of the core beliefs that you try to get therapists that you're working with to embrace?
I think it's all about being patient-centered, being client-centered in their work, and thinking about skill with diverse viewpoints. It's not just, I'm not going to attack them for their views, but it's actually understanding, being curious, being engaged, being able to connect to their worldview. And I think therapists often need help with that. They don't understand. One group that we have a workshop coming up on is gun owners. What's gun culture like? A lot of the mental health field pathologizes it. They say, well, you're compensating for something, you're aggressive, or it's some kind of negative pathologized thing. That's going to set you up to clash if a gun owner wants mental health care. And there is distrust between a lot of gun owners and a lot of the mental health field. So it's not just about not attacking them, but it's like being comfortable and being curious and asking and having empathy for people who have different values and different worldviews.
Imagine a world where every word you say could spark controversy. In today's polarized climate, with the prevalence of cancel culture, many tread carefully, fearing misunderstanding or ostracism. This is the challenging world Dr. Andrew Hartz navigates. Dr. Hartz, the founder and president of the Open Therapy Institute, is a beacon of hope. Every social issue people are concerned about today can impact their mental health. And OTI is trying to address social political bias and mental health care. Through his work and his institute, he has helped individuals caught in the crossfire of political polarization and cancel culture and the way it intersects the mental health environment. Now, rather than despair, Dr. Hartz offers a path to reconciliation. His innovative, compassionate approach bridges divides with empathy and ethical rigor. Now, we're exploring his transformative work, discovering how we can mend societal fractures through dialogue and understanding. Dr. Hartz, thank you for joining me. When did we first connect with each other?
I think it was last summer.
Was it last summer?
Yeah.
Yeah. And where did the article appear that I reacted to?
That was in the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, because I've read a lot of the things that you've written, but it was the Wall Street Journal. Dr. Hartz wrote an article talking about bias in the therapy room and how it was impacting some patients who couldn't find a therapeutic milieu to get into. And because some therapists were just turning a deaf ear and letting bias creep in. And it was a great article, and I'm going to put a link to it on drphil.com and on our podcast site because it was very inspirational. I don't read many articles and seek out the author and write him an email, but I did on this occasion, and you were gracious enough to respond, and we started a dialogue back and forth, and here we are today. So it's led to finally getting to meet in person and talk about it. I really admire what you're doing. In your own words, what's your objective in the work that you're doing?
Well, the Open Therapy Institute focuses on political bias in mental health care. Just every way that bias comes into the field in research, in training, and in the therapy room. Over the past 10 years or so, we've seen the field get a lot more politicized, and there's a lot more bias coming in. And so we're trying to counter that by addressing issues that are overlooked and not properly addressed.
Well, but now, anything that I assume here and am wrong about, I know you'll straighten me out on, but am I wrong in assuming that to a degree, this is actually part of the training model now, that they're actually training therapists to deal with these issues as part of therapy?
I think more of the training is overtly politicized. And there's specific ideologies around race and speech and politics that are shaping sessions. therapists who are taught every therapy has to discuss race and white privilege, or therapies that are attempting to dismantle the gender binary, those are gaining prevalence in the field.
Well, I've got several problems with that. Tell me how you're dealing with it at OTI, because Dr. Hartz was on Dr. Phil Primetime as well, and so we've talked about this a little bit. You've identified 50 to 60 political issues where bias is at play.
So it's people who have aggressively politicized training at work, people who are harassed for their viewpoint or canceled, people who self-censor, masculinity issues, faith-based issues, things that conservative patients might experience in therapy. Some of them are controversial, like women who experience regret about having an abortion. It's not such a rare experience, but it comes up in therapy, and therapists need to be skilled at responding in a patient-centered way to these issues.
I don't want our conversation here to keep people from seeking care.
Right.
I don't want to sensationalize this. I don't want to overblow it, but I'm real strong on giving people a sense that there is a bill of patient rights, and patients have the right to say, what do you do? What's your training? What are my rights? Do I have the right to exclude this?
Right.
Patients have the right to set boundaries, correct?
Yes.
And some therapists have actually said, I can't see you if you embrace certain beliefs. I'm not comfortable with that.
Yeah, some clinics, for example, that just say, we're not supporting Trump voters. That happened to a colleague of mine. So huge chunks of the country that just are being excluded from care at certain places.
If somebody comes in wearing a MAGA hat and somebody says, hey, listen, I just can't help you with your depression. I can't help you with your marital discord. I can't help you with your parenting issues because you're wearing a MAGA hat, and that tells me all I need to know about you. I can't help you. How is that even possible?
Right. I think the field is losing its focus from patient-centered care. And you're right. A decade or two ago, that wouldn't have happened. Something's changed in the field in the past 10 years.
There is an 85%, and y'all can fact check me on this, because there are different studies that show different numbers, but suffice it to say, there's an overwhelming majority of those in the mental health field that identify themselves identity politics-wise as liberal.
Yes.
One study says 85%, 10.5 to 1 ratio. On college campuses, if you look at professors, it's 11 to 1 liberal to conservative professors at major universities across the United States. And it's probably more at some and less at others. But it's a huge liberal to conservative ratio.
Yeah, in psychology, it's 17 to 1.
Yeah.
Liberal to conservative. And in some ways, those numbers don't even reflect the scope of the problem, because the conservatives tend to be towards the center. They tend to be liberal on social issues. They tend to self-censor. They tend to be older. So in terms of what actually gets taught and researched, it's even more left-leaning than the statistics indicate.
Okay. So it is safe to say that it's 17, 20, whatever to 1 liberal to conservative.
Yes.
So if the training model is saying we need to be looking to deal with race, gender, some of the social justice identified issues, there's a good chance that the orientation is going to be coming from the left. And if they're going to be dealing with that, there's a good chance that they're going to be left liberal agendas as opposed to conservative science-based agendas.
That's right. I mean, I think conservative therapists can be biased too. You can be biased in either direction. But because of the split in the field, if they were both biased at equal rates, it's going to be coming from the left a lot more than from the right.
Yeah. I think at the end of the show we did, I said, everybody has bias one way or the other.
Right.
If you're looking at a cornfield, you like corn, you don't like corn, people have preferences for things, and bias is just another way to say it. Poor sleep impacts productivity, focus, and energy, making it difficult to tackle daily tasks effectively. Tossing and turning through the night leaves many feeling drained and unmotivated. Beam's Dream Powder offers a solution. This science-backed healthy nighttime blend is clinically shown to improve sleep, helping users fall asleep faster, stay asleep longer, and wake up refreshed without grogginess. Dream combines powerful, all-natural ingredients like reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, apigenin, and melatonin, creating a blend designed for consistent, restful nights. It has become an essential part of nightly routines for those seeking better sleep. The ultimate sleep refresh for the new year. Try Beam's best-selling Dream Powder and get up to 40% off for a limited time when you go to shopbeam.com/Dr. Phil and use code Dr. Phil at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/Dr. Phil and use code Dr. Phil for up to 40% off. I can't think of many things that people don't approach with some expectancy set that this is going to be good, bad, pleasant, unpleasant, easy, hard, whatever. We very seldom come as a blank slate. Fair?
Fair.
Okay. And if we've got a rounding out 20-1 liberal to conservative educators, their product of what they turn out are going to have been exposed to liberal agendas. So you're going to have people that are more inclined to say there aren't two sexes, that it's okay to have a focus on equality of outcome rather than equality of opportunity. What I'm questioning here is, how is that client-centered or patient-centered? Some people call them clients, some people call them patients, whatever.
Right.
How is that client-centered rather than bringing your values, your beliefs into the session and contaminating the exchange and actually introducing toxicity into the situation?
Well, I think it does. I mean, if there are certain therapeutic approaches that have this explicit political bent, and I think they do damage care. It's interesting that the people developing those interventions don't seem interested in studying their effectiveness. When we do see people looking at how this impacts patients, it seems to be overwhelmingly negative. But a lot of the stuff that's being taught isn't even researched. It's just not evidence-based stuff.
Well, if you look at the people that are putting the training protocols together, if you look at our governing organizations that put forth the canons of ethics, whether it's the state boards or you look at the philosophical mission statements of the American Psychological Associations or counseling psychology or LPCs or whatever, it seems to me that they're abandoning the prime directive, which in psychology is equivalent to the do no harm that physicians adhere to, because everything is supposed to be that we approach the therapeutic relationship as a fiduciary, where you always put the patient's best interest ahead of your own.
Right.
Is that not fundamental to the relationship?
I think it should be. It should be. And I think that that's one of the risks of these activist-oriented models, that they threaten that.
I wish I could remember this study, and if somebody that's listening can find it, please send it to me. But I recall a study from many years ago that, and maybe you know it, the number one outcome criteria for improvement in therapy was the client adopting the symbol system of the therapist. That if they started to describe the world in the therapist's terminology, like if you were dealing with a therapist that was really focused on the inner child, for example, that when the client began to describe their world, their experiences in terms of the inner child, and they started to use that symbol system in describing their perceptions and experiences of the world, that those therapists were more likely to say, this patient is ready for discharge. This patient has made progress because they had adopted the therapist symbol system.
Right.
And so therefore they must be better. They see the world the way I see it. And
Right.
it was a very critical article that was saying that shouldn't be the outcome criteria.
Right.
That really impacted me at the time, and again, was not client-centered. And of course, it's always difficult. I think, I haven't been in private practice for a long, long time, but it was always difficult to have clear outcome criteria as to whether or not somebody was ready to move on, ready to end therapy, transition out, or to something else. I think, if you work in depression, you can use a Beck inventory. There were things you could use that were more objective than others, but it was difficult. But if you've injected yourself into it, there's so much subjectivity. I don't know how that's not contaminating the situation.
Yeah, that's such a great example of bias can come in subtle ways. It doesn't have to be just that the therapist is an activist. And I think there's lots of therapists who impose their values that way. They think they're helping the patient, and they don't realize that they might be, for example, demonizing the parents, or turning them into a victim, or not valuing autonomy or initiative. And that those might be the therapist's values. And they're cultivating them in the patient, and they're not even aware they're doing it a lot of the time.
Yeah, I always tried to focus on evidence-based therapies when I was doing therapy, but it's not wrong to have some of your personality, life experiences, beliefs humanize the experience with a patient. You can't be totally non-human in the experience. Some of that's going to come through all the time. Fair?
Yeah. Yeah. And no therapist can agree with all their patients on every issue. That's not achievable.
Right. Even if it is against your values, sometimes you have to, I guess, agree to disagree. And it might not be a therapeutic issue. It may be something you don't like about that patient and the way they are. One of my best friends is Steve Harvey. You know who Steve Harvey is?
Of course, yeah.
Just a prince of a guy. I mean, he's such a stand-up guy. He has a ranch down in Georgia, and we just shot a special down there on Father's Day where brought in like 250 young men that don't have fathers and don't have role models, even male, strong role models in their family. And so we bring them in for 3 or 4 days and really try to give them a reference point about men, what men do, how men treat women in their life, how men approach work, how men, just give them a role model of how to behave.
All the men at this camp are men. There are no women supervisors here. We just ask that you stay respectful. But now in exchange, I'm gonna give you the best time you ever had. We just gotta impart discipline is the first thing we gotta teach you. Discipline is doing what you have to do, even if you don't want to. That's the first thing you gotta learn. Let's go, baby, let's go. This is what I live for. This is what God made me for, man. I'm living my purpose. All that fame and fortune, it was for this. So I could teach somebody else how to do what I did, or at some level of it.
We bring in a lot of military guys, and here's some of the footage from this, them coming into the camp, and a great bunch of kids. And you see the military guys. They just have so much fun, and they fish and do a lot of things. There's Steve in his hat. But the interesting thing is about 500 yards up the road, not even, is a headquarters for the KKK right up from Steve, right up from Steve's gate. They jack with him all the time. They try to block his gate and all of this stuff. And one of these guys it's, I guess, I don't know if they still call him Grand Wizard or whatever, just harasses him all the time. And when he was telling me about all this, I was thinking what I would do as a therapist if the Grand Wizard of the KKK came in and wanted to see me as a patient and had problems raising his kids or something and started talking about all these things. Is there a point where you say, look, I'm sorry, but I can't do this. I can't get square with you. You're not coming in here about getting better at KKKing, but the things you're talking about, I can't get my head around this.
Sure. I mean, another example is like therapists that work with pedophiles.
Yeah.
You know, there's therapists that work with murderers, terrorists. That work is not for everyone. I think there's a very specific type of therapist who can do that work and do it well. And I do think everybody should be able to get mental health care, but most therapists, I think, aren't cut out for working with some of those groups.
In times of uncertainty, stemming from economic volatility, political shifts, and global events, it's crucial to work together and unite as a country for a brighter future. Amid these challenges, it's important to take proactive steps to monitor and protect your finances and retirement accounts. That's why I'm turning to physical gold and silver to help protect my accounts, and you should too. Gold and silver prices reached record highs this year, and central banks are buying gold like never before. So get started today with Preserve Gold, the only precious metals company I trust and recommend. They have hundreds of five-star reviews and millions of dollars in trusted transactions. Preserve Gold is giving away a free precious metals guide with information on how to help protect your accounts. Just text Dr. Phil to 50505, and you can get up to $15,000 in free gold and silver with a qualified purchase. So don't wait. Text Dr. Phil to 50505 to claim this exclusive offer from Preserve Gold today. Well, you know, when I was a graduate student, I went to North Texas State. It was a APA-approved program, top-notch. We had to do, as part of our practicums and all, we had to do groups for the state and the county. And I had to do a group, a domestic violence group with husbands that had been violent with their wives. It was court ordered. And so one night a week I had to meet with this group of like 12. And I remember I was like a second-year graduate student, and I had to go meet with them, and I thought, oh man, this is going to be tough because these guys are going to be ashamed and they're going to be, hanging their heads. Most belligerent, arrogant. Oh my God. I couldn't believe it. You couldn't have filled a thimble with remorse in this group. Wow. I mean, seriously. I was stunned at how arrogant and belligerent and resentful they were at having to be there, blaming their wives for having to be there and all this. And I thought, man, I am not cut out for this. I thought, I did it. I had to do it. It was assigned. And I thought, if there are people that do support groups for these people, I don't know how. I thought, not me. It isn't my job as a professional. I need to get me another. I need to become a welder's helper or something because I'm not cut out for this. So you're right. I hadn't thought about that till you said it. I've been to the prison in California where they had sex offenders, pedophiles.
Right.
And some of them had been chemically castrated. And I walked out of there feeling like, this is not for me. This is not for me. Somebody's got to do it. I get it, but.
Well, and it's, psychopaths are, I think, I don't know how they do it. There are these experts in it, but I have no idea how they do it.
But to me, that is completely different than somebody that is aligned differently politically. I mean, like,
right.
I don't get that. I'm talking about pathology that hurts other people versus somebody that just believes differently about a policy or believes differently about something. Even if I think I've got 140 years of science here that contradicts what you're believing, they just don't see it clearly. But that's not somebody that has victimized a child in the last 24 hours. That's a completely different situation.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think what activists do is they conflate the two. They say, well, anybody who supports Donald Trump is the same as the KKK, and they lump them in together. And so they say, that's why I'm not going to treat any of them. But obviously, they're totally different from a violent terrorist organization versus voting for a political candidate.
When you have people in your workshops and in the training that you do with them, you have to set objectives for them. You have to set guidelines and boundaries. What are some of the core beliefs that you try to get therapists that you're working with to embrace?
I think it's all about being patient-centered, being client-centered in their work, and thinking about skill with diverse viewpoints. It's not just, I'm not going to attack them for their views, but it's actually understanding, being curious, being engaged, being able to connect to their worldview. And I think therapists often need help with that. They don't understand. One group that we have a workshop coming up on is gun owners. What's gun culture like? A lot of the mental health field pathologizes it. They say, well, you're compensating for something, you're aggressive, or it's some kind of negative pathologized thing. That's going to set you up to clash if a gun owner wants mental health care. And there is distrust between a lot of gun owners and a lot of the mental health field. So it's not just about not attacking them, but it's like being comfortable and being curious and asking and having empathy for people who have different values and different worldviews.
Yeah. See, that's a perfect example to me. And you said the key word. I'm so glad you said it, because I think that unlocks so much that I think we've lost. And that is being curious. Like, I'm a gun owner. I have been all my life. I'm from Texas. I mean, down here, particularly if you're out on ranch land or something like that, you better have a gun.
Right.
There are snakes and coyotes and critters. I mean, you better have a gun just for safety purposes. I do have guns, and most of the guns I have, I'm kind of ashamed to say I haven't fired in a long, long time. But that doesn't define me. Probably on the short list of things I would hate to do more than anything in the world is to shoot somebody.
Right.
Oh my God. Can you imagine shooting someone? That would just be, it'd ruin your life. I mean, how do you live with shooting someone? That'd be terrible. So it certainly doesn't define me. But I would really be curious about somebody that would just discard a human being because they owned a gun. I'd be really curious about why they would approach that.
Well, they could discard them, or they might just have a negative stereotype. You're a gun owner, so you're this type of person. And I think it can run the spectrum. I think there are therapists that would have a lot of tension and maybe even conflict with a patient over that issue. And there's others who would try not to politicize it, but they have these negative ideas about what it means to be a gun owner. And that can even be communicated through body language. You just pull back a little bit, or you avoid that topic. You don't ask about it, and you communicate judgment.
I have two sons. One is Jay. He's the older. He's 7 years old, and his brother. He's the ultimate kind of preppy corporate type. When you see him, he's buttoned up and all. And his little brother is a musician. He is so tatted up, you wouldn't believe it. I have seen people that see him walking down the street that would actually cross the street if they saw him coming. I mean, because he's so tatted up, and they think, oh, this is a thug. I mean, these are the two. This is the one that's all corporate, and this is the other one, and they both look the same until you get a closer look, it's so funny how people judge. This is the one that's all tatted up. He looks like James Bond, right?
Right.
And people could see him that way and say, oh, wow, I would have no problem with that. But then somebody could see him in a different environment. And I have, no kidding, actually seen people that cross the street when they see the sleeves of tattoos,
Right.
and stuff like that. And he is absolutely the sweetest kid in the world. He has a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old and a cat and a
Well,
dog.
that should be what you learn as a therapist, because you
Exactly.
actually talk to people and you realize, oh, this person who doesn't look like it has an issue you wouldn't expect, or they have a worldview or experiences you wouldn't expect. Therapists should be the best at getting that point. So it's sad when they fall into those stereotypes.
Yeah, and that's what you worry about. They would see him and cross the street because of judgment, but if they saw him here
Right.
with his wife and little baby, they'd come up and say, oh, how cute. Let me introduce myself.
Right.
But you said the key word, curious.
Right.
If you're not curious about somebody, if you don't ask questions, if you don't explore, you never expand yourself. You never get there. And I worry that these therapists that are being trained to prejudge and get into identity politics and decide that anybody that says there are just two genders, anybody that says they don't support equality of outcome or whatever, are missing such an opportunity to learn and help, which is why what you're doing is so powerful and so important.
Well, we're training therapists to be more skilled at working with diverse viewpoints. We have a membership where therapists can join and have group consultation to develop their skills. We're raising awareness in the public around these issues. We're writing about these issues and doing research on them. And we are offering clinical services to people who want an open therapist.
And who's signing up for this kind of continuing education? Are they conservative therapists, liberal therapists?
I think we have about 50-50 mix right now.
Are they the ones that have the biases, or are they the ones that just recognize it exists?
Well, I think of bias as a spectrum. There's activist therapists that are deliberately politicizing sessions. There are also therapists who have biases that are more subtle. You know, they're avoiding topics, shutting down conversation. And then there's therapists who mean well and want to help with patients, but they don't know how to help. They don't know how to help somebody who's self-censoring. And so we're trying to help train them.
And how do you know whether what you're doing is impacting an individual therapist or the field in general?
That's a good question. I mean, I think we want, one of them is just getting more literature on these topics. The field needs to be researching, writing case studies, documenting what's happening. The poll you showed where patients report not being able to find a therapist that they trust, we want that number to be 0%.
How many therapists are you guys impacting at this point?
We're coming up on about 100 members. We just launched our membership a few months ago, and we've got several dozen therapists in our referral network. We get dozens of therapists at every workshop. So we're growing. I mean, our biggest barrier to reaching therapists is just having them know that we exist and reach out. We get contacted multiple times a week by therapists who are like, I just found out about you. And we're glad that there's a place where they can be curious and they can think nuanced about these issues. A lot of them feel really isolated in the field. They see how politicized things are becoming. Maybe they're self-censoring. They're worried that if they share their thoughts, they're going to be attacked. And so there's a real hunger for connection with other open therapists.
Awareness is the biggest thing.
I think so, and for therapists and for patients. You know, we get contacted sometimes by people who are looking for a therapist, and they've been out of therapy for years. They've kind of given up. They think they can't find anyone, and they happen to see us on social media, or read an article, or see a podcast, and reach out. And it's the same for therapists who are struggling to find a community.
Are you equipped to handle a big influx of therapists?
I mean, yeah, every day we get more infrastructure and more capacity. Our consultation groups that we run for therapists, those we divide up into small breakout groups, and then we have a big discussion. Those can be as big as they need to be. And same for our workshops. There's no limit on the capacity there.
All right, well, here's the big question. I don't want anything that you and I are talking about to make people that need help, that are looking for a therapeutic relationship, help over a rough spot in their life. I always tell people that it takes courage to reach out for help. It's easy to isolate, and it's painful, and I think sometimes destructive to isolate, sit in the closet, keep your head down. It takes courage to raise your hand and say, I need help.
Right.
And I don't want anything that you and I are talking about to say, wow, boy, this mental health field has gone off the rails, so I don't want to get involved in that.
Right.
Because that's not true. I think the vast majority of therapists that I have encountered, they sure didn't get in it to get rich.
Right.
They got in it because they care and they truly want to help and have a caring personality. And I don't want to do anything to scare people away from that, because I think that would be a mistake. I think if you need help, you should reach out for it, whether it's pastoral counseling or community therapist or community mental health center or private practice, whatever. Just make sure that the person is credentialed and, check them out. Do everything that you can to find out who and what they are. But what would you say to a patient that's looking for some help and some support and guidance? What would you tell them to do to make sure that they're getting the kind of help that they want, that they're not going to be pulled into a toxic relationship that's contaminated with bias? What would be the red flags they would look for, and how would you tell them to screen for what they're after?
Well, I want to second what you said. I think there are tons of great therapists out there, and people who would be client-centered and would be curious and empathic. There are lots, and I know them personally, and I'm meeting them all the time. I think you just I would look for politicized red flags if they have signals of political ideology in their bio, supporting political affinity groups, things like that. Shockingly, a lot of therapists do put that directly on their website or their bio. It's not always hard to find. So that's easy. For those that don't, I think it's worth telling people that it's okay to talk about politics in session. It's okay to talk about faith in session. Some people think they're not supposed to talk about those issues. You can, and you can get a sense of if your therapist is responding in an attuned, empathic way, or if they're closing off and avoiding those subjects. And if they are, you can raise it with them. If it feels like you're at an impasse, you can find someone else.
But you're saying that it's okay to communicate your expectations and your needs right up front. If you're with a therapist that's going to have a problem with that, you're better off to find out right up front.
Yeah. And I would pay attention to what they say verbally, but also how they react. Mm-hmm. A lot of people will say, oh, well, I'm not biased. But if they avoid the topic, they don't ask follow-up questions, or they communicate judgment, I would pay as much attention to that as what they say. And I would talk about it. Good therapists should ask about those things. They're important to people, they impact people, and it's worth the therapist actually opening the conversation on that. But if they don't, clients should do that themselves.
I would also tell people that there are different specialties. It's like in medicine, you have general practitioners, and then you have pediatricians, orthopedists, internists. There's all different kinds. Mental health have people that have concentrated in different areas as well. There are people that specialize in trauma. If you're someone that feels like have been through trauma, it's okay to screen for people that have specialized training in trauma. And if you're looking for marital therapy, screen for that. It's okay to have a generalist, but if you feel strongly that you have a specialized need, there's probably, depending on how big a city you're in and where you are, or if you're using telehealth in some way, it's good to try to screen for somebody that has specialized training and experience in your field, in the field that you're looking for help in. You have to be assertive enough if you're hypersensitive to or concerned about a bias in an area or someone that you're worried about judgment, you got to put it out there. And if you're not comfortable doing it, and some people just aren't assertive enough to put it out there, then, send a text message, send an email message, do something to break the ice and find out what you're up against. I've talked to patients before that said, I just don't feel comfortable asking about it. Then write it down and ask about it.
Right.
Do something to break the ice and get some dialogue going back and forth so you can find out what you're up against.
I have a colleague who's a psychiatrist who saw a patient 4 months before he raised the issue of, I've been self-censoring all my views in my life. I feel totally isolated. I don't know how to date. I don't know how to find anybody who's like-minded. I feel totally trapped. 4 months of weekly sessions before he felt, and it makes sense because somebody who's self-censoring that way worries that the therapist is going to have the same judgment as everybody else. But therapy is your opportunity to do things differently than everywhere else and hopefully get an attuned response.
Yeah. And, let that be a microcosm where you have a safe place to test some things out and do it where you're not going to get fired. You're not going to get rejected. That's a place to do some of that.
It's the heart of therapy.
Yeah.
Is
absolutely.
Actually being able to talk about that stuff.
Yeah, it is. Well, I'm going to put links with your permission on our site for therapists and for individuals, and they can click on, get more information and do it. And I wholeheartedly support everything that you're doing. So glad that you're doing it, and I hope you'll continue, and I hope you'll come back and give us progress reports and talk about what you're doing and how you're going about it.
I'd love to. Thank you so much.
All right, I appreciate it. Thanks for being on the show, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. All right.